Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about fertility and finances. I'm Shvetha Zarek. I'm the medical director at Arbor Fertility. We're a fertility clinic based in St. Louis, as well as offices in Columbia and in Illinois, so Southern Illinois. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Joy and Kristin. I'm going to give a brief introduction about both of them, and then we're going to dive into what fertility kind of testing and treatment entails, and then really dive into their stories and then talking through specifically the financial perspective related to fertility, because there is a lot of learning there, as many of you know. So, in terms of kind of talking through their background, Joy is a financial advisor and she specializes in fertility financial planning. Kristin Poelker is a certified financial planner with expertise in helping families navigate medical expenses. And if it's okay, I will let both of you kind of just do any additional introduction, and then I'll talk a little bit about the medical side of fertility.
Yes, thank you so much. First, want to throw out there that both Joy and I are registered representatives offering securities through Cetera Advisor Networks. We're a member of FINRA and SIPC, where advisory services are offered through the Cetera Investment Advisors LLC as registered investment advisors. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other entity, and Renaissance Financial, which is where we work, is independently owned and operated. We're at 5700 Oakland Avenue, St. Louis, Missouri, 63110. A little disclosure I had to give, but I throw that in to mention that we're all regional. So St. Louis is the headquarters of Renaissance, and Joy and I both work there. And the last little bit I'll get, I've been with Renaissance for over a decade. And in going through financial treatments myself, I realize still how much you can be surprised and unprepared, even as an advisor. So I was surprised how much I did not feel like I had adequate financial resources or the education about what this would entail. And that's why it's become a passion of mine to make sure that my clients and any other woman who's seeking their own fertility journey will have the proper financial education.
I'm Joy Straney. I also work at Renaissance Financial with Kristen. I've been there about 8 years. I just recently started a fertility journey, so pretty new to the world of fertility, but there was, like Kristen said, a lot to learn that I did not know, and just making sure that people have all the tools in their tool belt when they're going through something like this because it is a life-changing event.
So I want you to kind of take away from this probably 5 or 6 facts. The first one is, when do I seek a fertility specialist? A lot of that is based on the age of the female. We usually recommend seeing a fertility specialist, specifically a reproductive endocrinologist, if you've been trying for over 6 months. So 6 months for a woman over the age of 35, and for 12 months for a woman under the age of 35. So if you're below 35, try for about a year. After 35 years, we say try for about 6 months. And generally, there isn't a need to do any sort of referral. You can talk to your OBGYN, but it's not necessarily needed. So you can use just those 2 facts and kind of say, okay, it's time to seek the help of a fertility specialist. And there may be reasons why you're going to see them before. So just remember 6 months, 35 years. That's kind of the 2 main things. When you meet with a fertility specialist like myself, a lot of that we do over telehealth just to kind of help with ease, talking about kind of finances in terms of transportation, right? Is that we go through what testing entails. Testing is usually checking your hormones, checking kind of where the shape of the uterus and your ovaries, checking a sperm count. Those are kind of the main parts of it. And the cost of that testing can vary dramatically. So that's going to be a major theme of today, that we're talking through how different the cost varies depending on which clinic and which program you go to. From there, we get those results, and then I will advise folks on 2 different types of fertility treatment. They both happen to start with I, but they're very different. And this is kind of the main facts to remember. The kind of lower intervention is IUI, which stands for intrauterine insemination. At best, it has about a 50 to 20% success rate, at best. And that is where we help a woman ovulate, and then at the right time, we take a fresh sperm sample, wash it, and place it directly into the uterus. So it's kind of what I call kind of giving the sperm a limo ride, right? and kind of helping the whole kind of what I call date night, the egg and the sperm meet in the fallopian tube, all to have that happen. 15 to 20% success rate means that there's a lot of folks it's not working for. And that's when we usually, after about 3 rounds of IUI, which is generally over 3 months, 3 to 6 rounds, that's when we end up saying maybe it's worth it to consider IVF. That said, IVF is pretty intensive. It's kind of a scary word because there's a lot of parts of it that feel kind of unknown, including the financial portion. It's also much more successful. So the highest success rates of IVF generally are somewhere between 65 to 70% for a positive pregnancy test. That's very different than 20%. So that's part of why we see a lot more success with it. But that said, here at Arbor Fertility, we really want to start with lower intervention, but give it a good amount of time, but not necessarily waste time and resources either with a lower intervention treatment, and then we'll consider the in vitro. Kristin and Joy, I want to take it back to you. Did that sound similar to what you were told? Was there anything that was kind of different from your experience with those kind of general rules of fertility kind of guidelines?
Yeah, I'll let you go first, Joy.
No, not really. The only other thing that I would add is that we personally, me and my husband, we did genetic testing as well, which I didn't know how much that cost. But that was something we added on just because I'm an only child, so I didn't really know. I don't have any other siblings to go off of. So,
Yep.
and my parents had me a little later in life, so I just wanted as much facts and data as I could get.
Absolutely. That's a great point. That's actually considered the fourth part of our testing. We don't make it mandatory though. So we always talk through it. It's always considered a preconception consult when we see folks for the first time. So we talk them through that. And I agree with you about the way the cost of it is done. It's not particularly easy. Anything else that you wanted to add, Kristin, about kind of the fertility side, medical side?
The only thing I will add is that, well, I'll add one, my first financial lesson, and then 2, I'll add on the personal side, which I'll start there. I think that it taking longer, there can be some emotional shame maybe to that. And one reason why Joy and I came together is because at some point in my journey, I started being very transparent with everything that was going on with me because it did impact work. And Joy, then I think it's when you hit that year mark or close to the year when she reached out to me. And so she was like, we're hitting this year mark. Like, what do you think? And I just think those conversations, and again, this webinar, that's a gift we can give to women is knowing when to have those conversations. So we had that conversation. I was like, yeah, you should get these basic tests. And as you said, those are all the basic tests we got done. And so my first financial lesson will be save every receipt. I think when you're in the midst of this, there's a lot of emotion. But as I get down to the nitty-gritty later, that is a part of your, whether you're W-2 or 1099, possible tax deductions. Again, I say possible because you need to check with an accountant, but you won't even know if you can receive some of the deductions if you don't have the data. So keep every receipt for anything you've paid for out of pocket. There might even be, depending on your situation, some travel reimbursement. So keep every receipt for anything you start doing, starting with these basic tests, because then when you file your taxes, you're going to be able to identify maybe if there are some deductions. Again, there's more stipulations to that. Talk to an accountant, but that is where these financial lessons begin, because I think some people don't even realize that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think we should really just dive into your stories. I'm sure folks are curious about where you are in your journey overall. And then we can kind of have these take-home messages like save your receipt, probably like in bold exclamation points.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started my fertility journey last fall. I'm in that age range where I'm below 35, so it was recommended to me to wait 12 full months. I waited a little longer than that because we had some travel planned, but after that I worked directly with my OB/GYN to get a referral. They only gave me 2 referrals, so I basically just texted my friends and was like, which one have you heard of? So that's how I made my decision. It wasn't a whole lot of research. I just was really, like Kristin said, timing is everything. And I was really trying to just get on top of the ball and get it rolling. As Kristen mentioned, there's a lot of emotions going through your body, a lot of uncertainty. And there was a lot that I would recommend for folks to do that I didn't do looking back because now I'm still getting bills from places that I didn't know about. And I started my journey in September of 2024, and we're in February 2025. So I'm still getting bills from places that I didn't know I was supposed to be getting billed from. So taking notes, having maybe a medical journal would be like my one piece of advice, just to get your emotions out or say what happened that day, because it's very hard to just leave there and try to remember everything. So
Yeah, I would say, if you don't mind, probably in terms of fertility and finances, my number one advice is do your research from the beginning.
yeah.
Because the OBGYN may just only know the places that maybe they're really familiar with, maybe they're not so familiar with. You're not getting kind of the full scope. Although I will say there's great OBGYNs that have really done a good job of kind of knowing the ins and outs of the different fertility clinics overall. But you doing your own research will really help you feel good about making a choice. And, like anything else that's important, you may want to kind of talk to a few clinics before you kind of decide which one you're going to go with. That makes sense overall. So yeah, I like the idea of doing research, being with, and friends are good. I mean, it's a good way to kind of get information.
Yeah, I had a few friends go through treatment, so I just was kind of like, where have you been? Have you heard of this place? But yeah, I definitely think you should interview them like they're gonna be someone that's a part of your life, because you will be seeing them a lot, and you really need to like the person on the other side of that screen during your teleinterviews and your
Yeah. And with medical in general, it's normalized. I don't think it should be normal to get bills months and months later, right? I think even regardless of fertility, we all kind of experience that as patients. So yeah.
Similarly, so we had been trying for about 9 months, and again, my own personal anxiety was like, is this right? Do I even know what I'm doing? Because I'm sure like the patients you've seen, doctor, there's a lot of at-home things you can do. Like I'm checking my temperature, and I'm checking my, which you should speak more to what those are. But I'm checking my hormone levels, and it got to the point at 9 months where I was like, I don't even know if I'm doing this right. So I don't want to keep trying for 12 months and I'm not even checking the right stuff. So I did go into my OBGYN to make sure I was doing all that stuff right. And then when I went in for that, she was very supportive and said, and you know what? The 9 months was maybe around the holidays. So she was like, get through the holidays. And then when your next cycle begins in January, why don't you come in and we will do some of the basic testing that I think I asked. I think I knew to ask if those were covered. And they tested my husband's sperm, and they tested my, I always say this wrong, progesterone.
Progesterone. Yeah.
I literally always say that one wrong. I always think of like Progressive Insurance for some reason. We tested those first. So putting out there for women that those were not very invasive, and if they did not cost that much. So we actually tested that first and came back fine. And so we proceeded to try again till we hit the 12-month mark. And then it was 12 months when we then got into the additional testing that Joy did, which were the genetic for us both. Um, you know all the balloon test. There was a whole bunch of tests. And we did two consultations, one with each of the referrals my OBGYN got first before we moved forward with them.
Mm-hmm.
And one place, I love that it was local. Um, I love that the doctor we would probably see went to my alma mater, but then the receptionist was just not on top of things and scheduled me for the wrong date and all this stuff. And it was one of those things where I was like, these things happen. You seem like a lovely person, but this is too serious for me to go through this. To Joy's point, I was like, this isn't going to work. So I went with the other place. At the time, it was Bios. It's now owned by Kind Body. Because I was like, this is working. How you guys are a little bit more regimented, which is what I need as well, my A-type personality. So that's how we began our journey.
Gotcha. And where are you now with your journey?
So I now have a 15-month-old.
Awesome.
So spoiler alert, it does end on a happy note. However, again, for anyone out there, it did not go from testing to that. To jump ahead, we got the test done, and we then found out that I had unexplained infertility, which again, I'll leave you to explain that. But I was diagnosed with unexplained infertility, and we were presented IUI or IVF. Um, and while they did present the statistics, it did come down to cost and invasiveness, for lack of better words. And I would say IUI was described to me as something that would kind of be like a fancy on steroids cycle. And so that's why we decided to try that first. We went through two unsuccessful rounds of that. I decided I wanted to freeze my eggs because I wasn't getting any younger. We started this when I was under 35. I am 35 now. That led to IVF retrieval. That went well, but we had two failed IVF transfers, which then led to me deciding to do another IVF retrieval to do what we call banking.
Mhm.
And then that third transfer from my second retrieval turned into our daughter, Olivia. So all in
Okay.
all, that was actually a 3-year journey. Um, and the more and more we were getting into it, the more and more I wore my advisor hat and was asking the questions and keeping the receipts and checking the billing. You almost become like a CFO on like your uterus with all the appointments and scheduling and things that you're tracking. And to be transparent, we got to the point where I actually chose, it was 2022, the market was doing bad. I chose to get a HELOC, home equity line of credit,
Hmm.
to help us cover some of the bills because I didn't want to sell our investments when the market was low.
Hmm.
And I can say right now that we the HELOC is paid off.
Good for
Um,
you. Awesome.
yeah, but I want to be transparent that like, yeah, it's expensive and not everyone has this money laying around. And while we had, I didn't want to sell. So that's what led to, that's a little bit still the finance piece with my journey.
Gotcha. I would say it would be great if we can kind of get your take home messages with kind of an explanation, about what you would tell folks if you had, you know, a long elevator ride. So, like the elevator pitch. We already heard kind of save your receipts.
Hmm.
Definitely sounds like talk to a CPA. So, get some
Yeah.
professional advice
Yeah.
versus doing the taxes yourself when you're going through the medical treatment.
Yeah.
Include everything, including transportation
Yeah.
and gas, so on and so
Yeah.
forth. And what else would you say? And I can kind of plug in cost of that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if people know to ask those questions about the cost between IUI and IVF. And when they're getting the cost from the doctor, questions to also ask their insurance companies is not just what part of the procedure, but what additional medications. Because you get the cost, and then a lot of those costs are not including the meds you'll have to get as well. Um, so I think it's good to ask those questions. And then what we do as advisors is we do help people plan for the future. And before I went through this, that future looked like, do you have life insurance that if something happens to you, you have money that's going to come in the household? Do you
Hmm.
want to step up a college savings account? So that's what it looked like at first. And now I'm kind of like, you don't know how this journey will be. Do you have a nest egg set aside? Honestly, even young single women, I'm helping them if they do decide to freeze their eggs. Like
Right.
I can know, like, here's how much that might cost, and here's what we need to be aware of. Um, that also includes looking into your benefits if you need to take time off work to do these things. When I said that IUI was a little bit seemed a little less invasive, while you went to the doctor more than I expected, it was still less appointments than the IVF appointments.
Hmm.
And I'm very lucky that I had a job that was flexible. But in case you don't, those are all things that I would walk someone through on the front end. If they were like, I'm going to do this, I would say, first of all, just breathe, trust, like whatever will happen. And then here are the things that to be prepared for is that flexibility of time. And if you're missing work, how will that impact your budget? What's the nest egg you have? What are the
Mhm.
resources? And I would talk, that's what the advisor, I think's role is to talk through where are all the areas you can pull from to make this work for sure.
Yeah, and I think to echo a little bit of what Kristen said is really making sure that you and your partner have your plan, your financial plan really buttoned up because once that's buttoned up, that's one less worry that's in the back
Mhm.
of your mind, whether it's your benefits at work or what you have saved up or don't have saved, just making sure that everything that you can check all the boxes possible and sometimes that does mean that you need to bring in a professional like a financial advisor, but just making sure the little things are done, anything you can take off your mind that you just don't want to be bogged down with, oh, is that insurance paid or did I sign up for disability at work?
Right,
Like, what are my benefits?
right.
Just being able to check those little things off the list where you feel really good going into there and you're your best self and financially in a good place to do that. So, not saying you have to have a lot of money, but just making sure you check those little boxes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I love that. So first take home message, save your receipts. Second take home
Yes.
message is that because this can be financially straining, is to have even like a simple financial plan written out and also kind of as executed as best as you can. Is that what I'm
Mhm.
hearing?
For
Okay,
sure.
that makes sense because then you feel a lot more in control, um, regardless of what your fertility outcome is, really,
Yeah.
because it's especially hard if you feel like, you went through so much kind of funds are not at a place where you're seeing success, that's can be especially devastating for sure.
Definitely.
I will say, part of the reason I was talking through about doing a lot of research is because there is a wide variation in cost of fertility services that have nothing to do with the quality and success of the services, right? And so it's what you want to find is a combination for any patient is lower cost with, a high quality and high success. And all of that is entirely possible. I think
Yeah.
that is something that because there are clinics that charge a lot, they
Hmm.
tend to say, we're charging a lot because you're going to be more successful with
Right.
us. And I do not agree. We are
Yeah.
very, very fortunate in Missouri that there are great clinics, great doctors, and there's really, really high fertility quality care here. And
Hmm.
so if all the clinics are doing pretty much, minor variations, but pretty much the same quality of work, which they are for the most part, then cost should be definitely a huge part of you thinking through quality of life with your fertility journey. That's why we founded Arbor Fertility because we were seeing that the affordability was not there. And it still bugs me that, I just, we quote the car cost is kind of half to a third of a lot of the clinics, but it's still a lot if it's out of
Yeah.
pocket, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I really want folks to kind of move away from thinking that, oh, this place costs less, so they must be lower quality, because that is essentially what other clinics will tell you, because how else can they justify the higher cost?
Um, that is seems like a crime that places would do that. As someone who went through so many things and on surface had unexplained, so there wasn't anything. Which can you put your medical message on what unexplained infertility is, and then I want to continue to address this.
It is a diagnosis that about 15 to 20% of couples receive. We don't have an explanation. That's essentially what it's saying,
Yeah.
right? That said, I tell everyone that fertility testing is imperfect and is incomplete, definitely, because we cannot see what happens when the egg and the sperm get close to each other, right? We're only kind of looking at it from the 30,000-foot view.
Hmm.
And so there is an explanation. It may not be something that we're going to be able to detect with kind of the initial fertility testing.
Hmm.
So there are answers that a lot of times we're able to get those answers if someone goes through IVF, because then we can actually see the eggs, see the sperm, see the embryos, and kind of give a quality kind of sense of it overall. And so I don't love the term unexplained infertility, because you're like, what,
Oh yeah.
You're like, what, it's not working,
Yeah.
It is by far the best prognosis, but it's hard to kind of even wrap your brain around a diagnosis of infertility.
Yeah.
And then to go to an expert and then do all the testing, and they're like, well, we're not really seeing an answer.
Yeah.
Right. But likely, there is definitely an answer. It's probably something that we can't see just with blood tests, is what it is.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It felt very bittersweet because I was like, okay, I guess that means the parts are working, but like, what do you do? Like you said.
Mhm.
So with that in mind, another thing I want to throw out there when you mentioned that you try and keep costs low. What are some of those things that allows you to do that? Is it the drugs you're offered? Is it how long, if someone did IVF, is it how long you test the embryos, or just what are some of those ways?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, we don't kind of skimp on anything related to the quality of our lab, related to the
Hmm.
products that we use. Overall, I would say that actually probably how we're able to kind of control that cost is more with our team, because
Yeah.
having really a good team and the number of people on your team, the workforce is a huge part of the cost of an overhead of a medical practice or
Yeah.
any business. And so I tell the patients that we do have a smaller team. We have an
Yeah.
incredibly amazing, efficient team.
Right.
A lot of times it's very normal to see one physician with, a staff of like 15 sometimes.
Oh, for
And,
sure.
we have probably half of that.
Yeah.
And so maintaining that high level of efficiency and productivity, I think, is also really key. So what do I mean by that? Every kind of step that you experience, we're constantly trying to improve the communication, the protocols. I really truly believe that there is a balance of getting the best outcomes, but, not having, like 6 ultrasound appointments,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so that, I think, is where you really want to go to a clinic that, the physician and the team, the clinical, has been doing this for a long time, which we
Yeah.
have, in that we kind of know those efficiency points very well. And we're
Yeah.
also, I think, really more than anything, we're just really committed to providing more affordable care.
Yeah.
So that kind of means that we're not really going to see you for 6 ultrasounds if it's not needed, because those part of the reason why they're seeing you is you can bill for each of those,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
So it behooves them to kind of see you.
Yeah.
And there is kind of yes, there's kind of a medical reason for that, but, could I get the same outcome with half the visits?
Yeah.
You probably can, you know?
Hmm.
And so I think that's part of it, is kind of the efficiency overall. Because
And
we're still getting the same products. We use the
yeah.
same vendors. Nothing there is any different.
And I think that's so helpful because if there's anyone watching this who, again, they're looking at IUI or IVF and what to do, um, when I went through IVF and they coded me, I mean, I was going to the doctor every other day, So to your point, you're saying it's like, well, you still are going through the same round of IVF, but maybe like I saw you like one day and then day 5 and stuff and I named those days as someone who again has gone through it like and the more times unfortunately since I had to go through it more than once the more times you start to also get a better sense of like oh well like this nothing's going to happen until because you know your cycle and you start
Mm-hmm.
to know when you're going to do different things so
Mm-hmm.
that makes
Mm-hmm.
complete sense to me how if you do the research on the front end with a woman and know her cycle how you guys could curve down some of those cost and visits to make it more efficient for sure.
Yeah. So I would say it's the main portion of it is our team is smaller in terms of our cost. A lot of it is just simply our mission. We're very mission driven. So we're really trying to make it um, as easy as possible from the patient perspective. That includes things like, let's say someone does the ultrasounds but doesn't make it to the retrieval.
Right.
Let's say they're self-pay. Does it are we going to say, okay, well, we already did these visits for the ultrasounds. We're going to remove that cost, from that because you've essentially had those services. For the most part, we actually don't, because it's so important to be like, I already put all this money into it. And
Yeah.
I know I did a few visits. Like, am I going to have to pay that again? I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty easy for us to do an ultrasound, right?
Yeah.
That's not a lot for us. So, no, no, it's okay. You can keep that whole credit. We'll just move it over for your next cycle. A little bit different on the lab side. The lab side is much more kind of fund intensive because it's a
Yeah.
high level of technology. So
Right.
once you move to retrieval, it's hard to say that. But for visits like an ultrasound, sure, we can say that, and that gives peace of mind. So those are small things that are really big because it shows you the kind of attitude of the clinic to say, I mean, it's an ultrasound, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah,
Completely.
we try to do that for sure. I love the idea of having kind of a medical journal and almost like a financial part of it too, just be matching. I think that's a really good point that you just really have to record all of this. I will put a kind of a plug for Grain Fertility. We just partnered with them. It is founded by a couple and by a husband that went through a lot of fertility treatment and ultimately wanted a place where they could collect all the information because they did ended up moving from one clinic to the other. So they
Right.
have an app where you can collect all your records. And then they also provide patient empowerment. So our patients work with their coach just to be another place to just kind of talk through what they're going
I
through.
think that is so crucial because I did all the testing and then I wound it up getting pregnant naturally, which was a blessing. We're so lucky. I'm 23 weeks pregnant today. So, but my doctor was like, well, where's all your genetic testing results? And I'm like, I have no idea. I
Right.
was like, I literally can't tell you, and I know they were really expensive. And she's like, well, we can work through it. Like we can find it on LabCorp or wherever it was done at. But that is I was literally gonna say, I can't keep track of where all those results were. And now my OB/GYN with my pregnancy is like, where is that data? And I'm like, can't tell you. I don't know.
It's an app where you can kind of collect all of that yourself and you can kind of then if you go to another clinic, you have all of that kind of ready to go.
Okay.
Otherwise, it ends up being let's get your medical records, and that kind of
Right.
takes time
That takes
overall,
time.
for
Yeah.
Well,
sure.
and then also what we said with the tax receipts too, like you're going to one clinic, but then how it's billed comes through completely different. You're like, what was this? So it would be so nice for that. I just had like a Google Doc and a Google folder where as I was paid things, I'd be like, send it to me digitally. And I just remember I would just have to match them up on dates sometimes. I was like, oh, okay, this is from this and this. So that is amazing. So you say it's grain, is what you said.
It's Grain, yeah, GRAIN, Grain Fertility. Mhm.
Yes. No,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah, and the founder, his name is Joe Cody, Cody, and I think it's having companies like this that start up because there's a need from the patient perspective and they've gone through it as a patient, I think is by far the most powerful, right?
Mhm.
They've been through it and they're like, we can do this better. So let's just go ahead and do it. And so I could see that being for your clients a really good resource.
Mhm.
And also kind of referral as well, just to be able to utilize that
Mhm.
overall. Yeah. So we
So,
talked about keeping a journal. We talked through about keeping receipts, CPA, doing a lot of research and kind of talking to clinics.
right.
Overall, I think that reviews are really important overall. And like a resource like Fertility IQ will actually kind of break down like the ratings, not only for the financial billing side, but also for the clinical side. And
Awesome.
I think we really need to raise the bar that patients should expect to get as smooth of an experience on the clinical side as and the financial billing side, because
Yeah.
that is something that it will always be a work in progress. We're
Mhm.
not perfect, but we're really trying to improve every day. But if you see clinics that get high marks for financial and billing, that to me is like, okay, I really need to pay attention to this clinic
Yeah.
because that's like kind of a mark of like the next level of them thinking through everything.
Yeah, and transparency and helping you. So a question I have for you then in that sense, because you guys are your mission and you're such advocates for the patient is what have you seen as a question that you're like, I wish more people asked this because it's the one thing that when we're in it comes up as a hurdle because they just didn't know. And that could be medical or that could be financially rated. But is there something that you consistently see? And so now you might even try and make sure you communicate that on the front end when people start this journey and come to you.
Yeah, I think we're really trying to push our field to have price transparency.
Yeah.
Not only do we believe in more affordable care, but that's easy for us to have our costs just on our website.
Right.
I think it should be there, period, regardless of,
Right.
If there's someone out there who's lower than you in terms of cost, because you should be able to speak to as a clinic about if you are at a higher cost, why, right?
Mhm.
Overall, I mean, we simply provide lower costs because we choose to.
Right.
We make it work. We find a way for it to work
Yeah.
overall. But that price transparency, if your clinic can't put the costs on their website, and some do, we're not the only ones,
Right.
then questions why,
Mhm.
why can't they? And that would always make me wonder if maybe it's because they are higher costs, and if they are, why are they higher costs?
Right.
It could be, it's simple capitalism. If you want to go there, people will pay, so you can charge it.
Yeah. 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 And I think I want to say it again, I think you bring up a good point. Higher cuts does not necessarily mean higher success rate.
Correct.
Like people need to know and understand that. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. The price transparency part, I think it's a good movement to kind of push towards that overall. And this is a very timely webinar that we're doing because there was a executive kind of directive that just went out today that they're going to be looking into making IVF more affordable from the executive office from the White House. That's a
Yeah.
huge deal.
It is. It is
It's
a big
huge.
deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we'll take it as a win that it's even making the headlines and getting to the Oval Office for sure.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it varies so much state by state because
Right.
I have friends that live in Boston and fertility treatment's covered under health insurance there.
Great point.
Right.
Mhm.
So here in Missouri, that is not the case. It's very expensive. So I think just overall transparency, I know every state's going to be different where how they handle their insurance because that's health insurance is regulated state by state. But I think that's a great point is knowing it gives you a little more, data to go behind of like, okay, how much do we need to budget?
Mhm. Mhm.
What are we looking at as a household?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point that I think I've been talking about it for so long that, it's like not something I bring up automatically anymore, that Missouri is not a mandated state for fertility treatment, which means a lot of people are still paying for it out of pocket.
Right.
I will say in my, decade plus of practice in Missouri, it has gotten better. It used to be that most people were self-pay and there were very few that had fertility coverage through their insurance. And now it's probably half and half. So
Mhm.
if you're really thinking outside of the box for fertility treatment, you could consider moving to a state where they cover it. You can consider changing employers and having an employer that has fertility benefits
Right.
overall. I mean, it's just a different way to look at, you know, employment, but it's an important one because it could really, really kind of change that metric for you where you go from being like, I don't think we can even do IVF to not only can we plan for IVF, but we have multiple rounds covered, you know? So where you live and who you work for matters a lot.
It does. We completely agree with that because maternity leave, what is covered like
Right.
dependent care, all
Right.
your employer benefits really do add up at the end of the day. And HSAs, FSAs,
Right.
those are all things we help our clients with every day. And it does matter. Those benefits matter because that could be several $1,000s that you're not directly seeing in compensation, but over time makes a really big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to add, and when we're asking about benefits, it's those kind of things. Do you have an FSA to use, an HSA? What's covered? And I think the employer thing is a good point. Let's normalize asking about that. Even if you're not considering a family right now, again, a lot of times if fertility treatments are covered, they might cover a basic egg retrieval. Again, if you're a single woman who wants to go through that process. So normalizing where that fits into it and what's covered, I think, is something that's important. And when we ask about benefits, good things to look over.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then the last portion I would say is medications can become pretty costly as well. So there are tips for that in terms of which pharmacies. Pharmacies also vary a lot with cost. I encourage folks to reach out to other people who've done fertility treatment. That's not something that we can help with on the provider side, but perhaps, if someone has extra medications they no longer need, those are things that will certainly help the budget quite a bit overall.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm glad you addressed that because I found that to be the biggest shock. The cost of the medication, and I didn't know much when I first went through it. So I just went through the pharmacy that was recommended, and then only over time did I research other pharmacies
Mhm.
and, to your point, utilize Facebook groups and things. And when we say Facebook groups, because you might meet someone who is on the same protocol as you, but again, her cycle, she didn't have to take progesterone. Am I saying it right? Progesterone?
Progesterone. Uh-huh.
Progesterone. I don't know why. I
There you
never,
go. You got it.
full process, never could say that word right. But maybe she didn't need it as long. So she has some extra. She's successfully getting pregnant. She has some extra. So it's things like that. So yeah, not advocating just randomly taking someone's medication, but you can, like, there will be protocols and you find someone on their protocol. And I had extra medication things too that I connected with women on because that can be a very expensive piece. And that leads into a question I have. Have you seen, unfortunately, some women who, or families, not just women, families who have stopped the process at some point because of cost?
I have,
Yeah.
and the part that we haven't kind of dove into is that there are recommendations that I can give as a reproductive endocrinologist. And it may not be the recommendation that you want to hear, you know?
Hmm.
And so our role is always to support, have the patient in the driver's seat, have expert kind of recommendations of pros and cons and success rates. But they could still want to go for that. Let's say for IUIs, let's say they're not interested in IVF. We usually recommend, let's say, about 3 IUIs, 3 to 6. Let's
Right.
say they're like, we're not doing IVF, so we want to do at least 12.
Yeah.
Okay, that's going to add up. And, eventually some folks go, maybe I don't want to do IVF. No one wants to, but then all of a sudden they're like, okay, maybe I will.
Yeah.
And that's the part where they're like, but I've just used all these funds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that could actually be true for IVF as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so we will support you with where you are and meet you where you are with your journey.
Yeah.
But may want to kind of just really take it in, or like maybe this is not really what's recommended. You need to be ready for, low success, high chance that it's not going to work. There's so much hope and emotion with it that it's really hard to hear that.
Yeah.
I think that's where we've kind of lost people, hopefully temporarily, is that they're like, even though we've been talking about it from the beginning, it's very different when the reality hits and it's devastating.
Yeah.
And so, I've had people who then I'm the physician that they come to after an experience like that, after they've put it aside for a set amount of time, sometimes it's
Right.
years, and then they
Yeah.
regroup. And then I'm like, okay, tell me about what it was like in the beginning, and they're like, well, the doctor did tell us to do X treatment, but, we were really resistant to that. So we did Y. And then they're like, well, maybe we really should have just gone for X.
Right.
And now they can say that years later.
Yeah.
But just think of through all the appointments, all the labs, all the counseling, all the treatment that they went through to get to that.
Yeah.
So it is a journey. And I do think that, physicians will kind of give you, when they're giving you an opinion about it and recommendation, I really truly believe that it's for your own good. We have
Right.
great colleagues. I don't really think anyone's kind of trying to falsely lead you somewhere.
Yeah.
Kind of decide what you want to do with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of finishing up time-wise. I would
Yes.
love probably for everyone to kind of give like 3 points. We can start with Kristin, Joy, and then I'll kind of finish up. specifically more related to the fertility side, sorry, the financing side of fertility. We're not going to talk so much about the medical. And then we have a lot to kind of talk through. We may want to consider putting this down on paper, actually, in some version or the other.
Yeah,
Overall, I think it'd actually be really useful for the fertility community to
yeah,
have a primer, a book, a resource, something
for
Yeah.
sure.
to review this. So yeah, go for it, Kristen.
Yeah, based on my experience and what you mentioned, your fertility journey has multiple layers emotionally, what you can handle physically, and then what you can handle financially. And so I do think before you embark on this journey, it's thinking through and asking the questions, not just if this does go well, what finances come from that, because have raising and supporting a child is not cheap. But then if it doesn't go well, you and your partner are kind of sitting down of what does that look like? How much are we willing to put into this from a time, physical, and financial standpoint? I mean, and I hope I don't sound cold when I say that, but that was something that we thought about too. If the third round, which our doctors actually kept saying, we think it's going to take 3 rounds of IVF, that gave us hope. But if it didn't happen a third round, how much financially could we take? That was a discussion.
Mhm.
Um, and so I just think if you have some of those on the front end, it will make even your decisions a little bit easier and smoother on what to do next. Um, because it's going to be emotional along the way. So any extra piece of data that can help you take a little bit of emotion out of it and just think through so you can look back and just be happy with whatever you decided, whether that was we know we wanted to do this amount of time, this amount of energy, this amount of finances. You know that you did what you felt like was the right amount of time and things to do.
That's awesome. I love that talking about it from physical, emotional, and financial.
Yeah,
I think
right.
all of that is those three facets are really good to think through.
Right.
I agree with Kristen on all those fronts. I think financially, making sure, like Kristen said, you and your partner or you feel good about going into this and having that financial house buttoned up, whatever you can do, just simple things like checking how much am I putting in my 401k. So just
Mhm.
doing the simple things first and making sure you feel like you're in a good place heading into it and taking some of those extra stressors off the top of your mind. The emotional piece of it, I definitely would say you need to have really hard conversations with your partner.
Yeah,
And maybe that means you need therapy along with it, couples therapy, which does also cost money.
right.
But, at the end of the day, your relationship with your partner is what got you here and the love you have together. So making sure that's stable because it's a very hard process to go through. No matter at what stage you're in. So I think my final piece would definitely be the medical journal. I learned that from someone a very long time ago when I went through another health situation, and it really just reminded me like, okay, this is where we went, this was what happened, this was what was said, because I think you can get even a few days down the road and you're like, what did they tell me? What are we doing next?
Mhm.
And who's billing what. So
Mhm.
Right.
it can get very confusing, and it's just nice to have notes to look back through. I mean, even if you're just doing it on your phone and your notes app and just have a digital journal, it doesn't have to be complicated, but just taking some of that extra stress off your brain because that's the most important part. And then it also helps you keep on track financially too, with who needs to be paid and what needs to be paid now. So.
Yeah.
That's great. So, from the medical perspective, I would say probably the one main takeaway is do a lot of deep research, including with meeting with different clinics um, before you dive into kind of all of the fertility treatment. I think it's okay to kind of the fertility testing can be done sometimes even kind of at home. We use a lot of at home semen analysis kits now, actually. They've been really popular. But once you're kind of really talking about treatment, are you going to a place that can clearly lay out a plan? Can they give you a very clear structure of the financial perspective in terms of billing insurance? Do they accept your insurance?
Mhm.
is that all kind of written down clearly to be able to see overall? So you're not kind of feeling like you're not sure and keep getting different answers. I think if they are clear, then that tells you that they're kind of also efficient with it and probably are going to deal with less issues. That said, we do have to work with other companies. You mentioned the genetic carrier screening, and we try to match with people who are like similar to us in terms of their communication and billing. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. But as best as we can have in our control, I would. So it's worth to take the time to do the research, because one thing I'd like to kind of move away from is folks saying, gosh, I wish I'd known.
Yeah.
We want to make you savvy now.
Right.
And then you're like, okay, yeah, no, I feel like this went well,
Yeah.
but, I would say probably 90% of the time it's, I had to go through treatment, multiple times, or I went to a different clinic and then I realized how different it can be,
Yeah.
and so providing that perspective, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agree. That's the financial
Awesome.
advisor motto. We don't want you to say, I wish I had known.
Yeah, definitely. I would love if you both don't mind kind of repeating where folks can find you. And from there, I'll kind of finish up about if anyone's interested in kind of learning more about Arbor Fertility. So Joy, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm located in St. Louis, Missouri. I work at Renaissance Financial, and you can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. That's where I am on social media currently. But I'm located in the St. Louis office, but I work in all 50 states. So
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'm Kristin Thompson Pelker, Poelker. I also work at Renaissance Financial in St. Louis with Joy, but also work across the country in various states. Kristin Thompson Pelker on LinkedIn, Renaissance Financial, you can look up my name. And then on Instagram, Financial Fertilization is where I'm also putting out some nuggets on my journey and financial guidance, and maybe a TikTok dance or two, maybe.
I love that Instagram handle.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's very creative.
Thanks.
So I'm Shvetha Zarek, the medical director of Arbor Fertility. Arbor Fertility is a women-owned independent fertility IVF practice. Our mission is to provide more affordable care with the same high quality of care and success rates. We are located in mainly Chesterfield, Missouri, in the suburbs of St. Louis, but have satellite locations all the way from mid-Missouri and Columbia all the way to O'Fallon, Illinois. And with that, thank you so much, ladies. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, this has been wonderful, and we will have to continue this conversation.
Agree. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
absolutely. Take care.